Good evening, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Great to be here tonight on episode 429. Tonight's episode is titled Polygamy Fallacies. Once again, we're back at it on the Light on Truth letter by Austin Fife. Austin Fife is not joining us, I'm sad to say. He has steadily and steadfastly refused our invitations to come on the show to answer some questions about his Light on Truth letter. But we have the next best thing, and that's Kolby Reddish. How you doing?
Good morning, RFM. How are you?
I am fine, thank you. We are recording this bright and early on Saturday morning, November 22nd, with hopes it will premiere this evening.
Should.
And I have been working like a dog on this chapter in the Light on Truth letter dealing with polygamy. It's one of the strangest chapters. I think it's the crappiest chapter in a crappy book.
Yeah, it's a tough competition for which is the worst chapter, I'll say.
It's like Austin doesn't know what to do with this subject. So he ends up throwing out all sorts of platitudes out there and hoping that with a new thought, which he got from Jonah Barnes. So I doubt that it's a new thought because Jonah Barnes is a famous thought thief. Aren't you, Jonah? You know you are, you plagiarist, you. So, I mean, he steals my research. He steals Eldon Watson's research. God knows who else's research he's stolen. Yeah, it's early. It's earlier here. I want you to know. It's earlier here in my time zone by 1 hour than it is over there. Don't make me carry the show, Kolby.
I'm not going to make you carry the show. Let me just say, since you're commenting on Jonah, I love the episode you guys did. It was fantastic. Your case was airtight for the intention behind it, based on the particulars of the way he edited some of the quotes and stuff. It was wonderful. And I've joked before that, if you have to make yourself feel important by calling yourself a fake professor on the internet, I can think of nothing more pathetic. I guess I'll just say it that way.
Yeah, I mean, professors are generally supposed to not plagiarize people, right?
It is frowned upon to plagiarize.
I thought it was frowned upon.
Both as a student and as a professor, which, people who've gone further with their education would understand. I'll just leave it at that.
I'm here to remind him.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm doing a service. I would feel ungrateful if I didn't remind him of what a plagiarist Jonah is. So let's go ahead. Let's get on with this show tonight. We got so many slides to get through. It's amazing what a short and crappy chapter, how many thoughts it can generate.
Mm-hmm.
But here we have it, the title slide, Polygamy Fallacies. This is the Light on Truth letter, chapter 16. Remember, Austin didn't number his chapters, so I had to do it for him. But in his book, The Light on Truth letter, it's titled Plural Marriage, and it's the 16th chapter in as I count it. So that's why I have that. Now, you made this great scene, what do you call this? Next to it, whack-a-mole.
I call this adorable claymation of my inner thoughts. But yeah, I made this because this chapter is just so replete with so many of the fallacies that Austin himself points out in his first chapter. And we've made that point in every chapter we've done since the first one, that it feels like fallacious whack-a-mole. But so that's kind of what I was trying to illustrate here. And if you see the inscription on the hammer there, it's clobbering time. We're going to go after this.
I see it. It reminds me of Aunt Petunia's bright-eyed nephew, Benjamin. Okay, so it's clobbering time. This is why I call it polygamy fallacies. Exactly. He starts his chapter, his book, his letter. He's got this whole chapter devoted to detailing logical fallacies in order to warn you against those evil critics who use them all the time.
Right.
And then he goes ahead and he uses them all over the place. And in this one relatively short chapter, I've caught him off first base 7 times.
I should have added a few more whack-a-moles then, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, there's 7 times, and we'll go through it and see it. And I took the screen grab of what he has in this first chapter and put it juxtaposed with all of the logical fallacies he's using in order to try and defend polygamy. And polygamy needs a lot of logical fallacies to defend. I'll give him that much. So there's the Light and Truth letter. Oh, he calls it the Light and Truth letter. That's by Austin Fife. It's my search for more light and truth. Yeah, I don't think so. Let's see how he does. Now, Kolby, you have mentioned a number of times that his book is written to the critics of the church. And I just wanted to include this slide at the beginning to confirm that what you're saying is true. Do you want to read that opening line from his introduction and tell us anything you want to about it?
Yeah, sure. An open letter to the CES Letter Foundation, Mormon Stories, and other critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So let me pause after that, that clause, and just say, you and I definitely would fall in the latter category of other critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not to mention the fact that both of us have been on Mormon Stories a number of times. So why Austin feels like we're not fit to address is interesting when he's willing to write at us, but not talk with us about some of the problems with his letter.
I know I'm starting to get a complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, when Kolby says to Austin, why won't you talk to us? You wrote the letter to us. And then we're talking about the letter that you wrote to us and you won't talk back. Why is that? I think we all know why it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because he would have a problem defending his letter if he came on the show. But we would be very nice. We just want to ask a few questions and see what it is he would have to say to them, since he did write this letter to us. Now let's go forward to chapter 16, titled, as I said, Plural Marriage, Questions and Concerns. He calls that on every chapter. And he starts off, as he always does, with a couple of quotes allegedly taken from the internet. By the way, I say allegedly. I don't have any doubt that he found these somewhere on the internet in order to start his chapters. Sure. But this is how he does it.
It is worth noting, though, that one of his fallacies that he calls out is quote mining, by doing this exact thing, going to find unfavorable quotes. So the beginning of every chapter literally begins with a fallacy or manipulation tactic that he calls out in the first chapter.
Okay, I guess we'll have to make that 8.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't catch that one, but this is quote mining. I know you wanted to say something about at least one of these quotes. Do you want to go to that one, Kolby?
Yeah, sure. I think if you'll go to the next slide.
Oh, is it the next slide?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. I see. This is one that you marked up. Good.
Yeah, because this original quote, as I was reading it, prepping for these slides, aside from correcting the first sentence, and I'll read it so that folks can understand, aside from correcting the first sentence, honestly, that entire quote that he mined is 100% true in my estimation, and I think we're going to show that as we go throughout the episode today. So the original quote read, "Nothing that the Mormon Church has ever taught about polygamy to us as members was factually true." I think that's probably a slight exaggeration because it's basically a complete absolute case. And so I wouldn't agree with the way they framed it, but I would say the church's leaders and authorized materials taught demonstrably untrue things regarding polygamy in the church. That, I believe, is almost uncontestably true. And then to finish out the way the Reddit user he snipped the quote from continues, they said, "It was a disgusting, abusive system which no loving God would ever condone, let alone command. It is immoral, sexist, and deeply troubling. We have been deceived." And I thought this was a good frame for, this is one of the few slides I added for today's presentation. You really did the heavy lift here. But I wanted to share that it was when I was on my mission that I first read Doctrine and Covenants 132 for the first time, completely like isolated from anyone telling me which verses to read and which verses to avoid. And as I read DNC 132 on my mission for the first time, completely unguided, I noted that it uses the word destroy 11 times, and I thought it absolutely had no relationship to the God that I understood. So I made allowances for why that was okay, and Joseph Smith could still be a prophet, but I recognized this system as a disgusting, abusive system as a full believer, and as a sexist system as a full believer. The worst verse, I think, by far, is verse 54, which is directed at Emma Smith, Joseph's wife, and it reads, "And I command mine handmaid, Emma Smith, to abide and cleave unto my servant Joseph and to none else." Right there, that's a definitionally sexist system because it's treating a man different than it's treating the woman. Joseph is allowed to have multiple wives and sexual partners while Emma's told to abide and cleave unto none else. That's just definitionally sexist. It's like Austin doesn't know what the word means. And then God says, "But if she will not abide this commandment, she shall be destroyed, saith the Lord. For I am the Lord thy God, and will destroy her if she abide not my law." So I guess I'll leave it to our listeners to say whether that quote exhibits a disgusting, abusive system, which they don't believe a loving God would be involved in. But for me, I definitely think this Reddit user's description is completely accurate.
Yeah, verse 54, that's one of the verses they don't want you to get you to, or for you to get to. when you're in Sunday school class studying the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, because they tell you to stop at verse 50.
Right.
And I should say, they used to tell you to stop at a certain verse. Now they've changed it where they talk about different verses, but they don't talk about any verse after verse 50.
Right.
Okay. I'm noticing Emma Smith, the handmaid. She's mine handmaid. This is the original Handmaid's Tale that Emma Smith experienced. She lived it.
Yep.
And the final thing I'll say is that I didn't know that destroy occurs 11 times in DNC 132. It's remarkable because 11 was a very important number to the ancient Hebrews, Kolby, which indicates to me that section 132 was written by ancient Hebrews. It is true.
Oh, you just spun up a new apologetic that'll go on for 15 years. Congratulations.
I'm very proud of myself for that. Okay, so here we're going to go through all the different lines. We're going to go word by word and line by line. I know Austin hates it when we do that, but we're going to go through his chapter here. And this is something you've put something underlined in red. That's great. Can I read the first paragraph? You take the second paragraph and we'll go from there.
Great.
Okay. Joseph Smith's Polygamy in Kirtland. This is Austin Fife Slide on Truth letter I'm quoting from. Joseph Smith's Polygamy in Kirtland and Nauvoo totally puzzled me when I debated leaving the Church of Jesus Christ. When I listened to critics, they emphasize a very simple narrative. It's always very complicated. That's one of the things that apologists like to hide behind is complication. When I listened to critics, they emphasize a very simple narrative about polygamy in the early church, namely that Joseph and other church leaders were manipulative, sex-crazed scoundrels. Now, that's the one you underlined. Did you want to comment on that, Kolby?
Well, it's just highlighting the false binary that I know we'll talk about here in just a minute. I just thought, what a great encapsulation of not what the critical position is. I don't really know any mature critic of the church who would state their issue with polygamy is that Joseph and the other church leaders were manipulative, sex-crazed scoundrels. I think there's a lot of wiggle room between prophet of God and manipulative, sex-crazed scoundrel. There we go. Okay.
Easy
I'm
for
not
you
going
to
to read
say.
that line anymore today.
Okay. Wow. That was impressive. But yes, this is where he begins setting up immediately the straw man of what the critics say, because I've never heard anybody say that either.
Because what he's doing tactically, like rhetorically, is he's assuaging the concerns of all members who would read this book unless there's like affirmative, very strong evidence that Joseph and the other church leaders were manipulative, sex-crazed scoundrels. What he's doing is setting up that that's the only way there can be a legitimate problem with polygamy.
Good point. Now, I think the evidence is clearly there that they were manipulative, sex-crazed scoundrels, but he's not going to cover that particular evidence. He goes on to incite a reaction from me. Critics compared Joseph to the leader of the fundamentalist LDS movement, Warren Jeffs. Can you imagine they would do that just to incite a reaction from our good friend Austin? Taking advantage of the few details that survived that era, critics seemed contented with flashing headlines about Joseph marrying other men's wives and teenagers as young as 14 years old. What's not true about either of those, Kolby?
Both of those are true, and both of them reflect, and I'm going to come back to this point a few times. I hate the way this is often phrased by apologists that Joseph was marrying other men's wives, because look at where the feature is. Like, look at where the focus of the way they describe that is. The focus is on the men who are, supposedly being wronged by their wives also being married to Joseph Smith. The focus in Mormon polygamy is never on the women. It's not marrying women who are married to other men. It's marrying other men's wives. The way he crafts the sentence, the people who are wronged are those other men. And it's just, I'm going to make this point a few times throughout this episode, but it's disgusting. And it's so revealing of the sexism in this system, the sexist water that Austin's been swimming in since birth. And he doesn't even recognize it, that it causes him to say stuff like this and to justify Joseph Smith being married to a 14-year-old. It's so odd because Austin avoids some of the tough issues that he didn't want to argue. The way you first found this letter, or your first episode about this letter, was whacking Austin over the head because he didn't talk about the SEC scandal. So he didn't include that. And he would have been far better off to just have never written this abhorrent chapter. It's awful.
I'll continue then. As
Great.
I did more, or did you want to read the second half? I think it's now your turn.
Sure, I'll read these last two. As I did more research, the critical narrative about polygamy just didn't fit. Oh man, I just have to stop there too and just say, like, so many times these apologists say stuff like this, and what they're really saying implicitly, if people stop and think about it, is you're engaged in looking at two different hypotheses. And what he's really saying is that believing that Joseph Smith maybe wanted to manipulate people into sex or get sex through religion is less believable than that an angel with a flaming sword came and directed him to commit polygamy. That's really the choice that you're looking at. Which of these two things is more likely? And it's just so crazy that they'll say these critical narratives are the ones that just don't fit. Like, now, if people want to accept those things on the basis of faith, that's fine. But if we're talking about what's more likely, it's definitely the critical narrative that's always going to be the more likely narrative. Anyways.
Yes, you're right. And as you mentioned before, rhetorically speaking, what he's doing is he's created a straw man of the critic's position, which is extreme. And that's the one that's underlined there. We read it before.
Right.
And now he's going to say, hey, guess what? I looked at all this research, and the critic's straw man position that I created and put in their mouth for them just doesn't seem to fit the evidence.
Right. Right. So he continues and says, if Joseph and other church leaders were only doing what they did for power and sex, much of their behavior makes no sense. That narrative only left me with more questions. If Joseph only wanted sex, why were his likely first two polygamous wives in Nauvoo married women who were 7 months pregnant? Didn't the medical advice of the day advise against sex during pregnancy, warning that it could be harmful to the unborn child?
What do you think of that rhetorical question? It seems to have the idea built in that Joseph would be concerned about that, or that maybe he wouldn't start with, I don't know, pregnant women to show his virtue. I don't know the answer to it, but it seems like he thinks that Joseph Smith married women who were obviously married, to other men, right?
Right.
And they're 7 months pregnant, and somehow this is a get out of jail free card for Joseph.
Well, the other thing about this insane question, I mean, these question sections are some of the worst parts of this letter in a really, really bad book. But he's talking about the first two polygamous wives in Nauvoo. Why are we starting with Nauvoo? That's not when plural marriage started.
Ooh, good point.
Yeah, the entire thing is it's just a trick. He's just tricking you by suggesting something that means absolutely nothing means something in the way he's phrased the question.
That's a good point. Of course, it started before Nauvoo. I mean,
Yeah.
It really got up and rolling in Nauvoo, but it didn't start there. So he's treating these people as if they're the first two women that Joseph Smith married, when that's not the case. Is that right?
That's correct. The way I found out, this is weird because I graduated high school in the mid 2000s. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so in seminary, I feel like I'm in a very weird place, even from like my siblings and what they learned in seminary and in church, because I was taught explicitly that Joseph Smith was not a polygamist, continuing into my mission. The way I found out that Joseph Smith was a polygamist literally is because Family Search, somewhere around 2011 or 2012. No, it would have been a little later than that because I was married. So maybe 2013, 2014, sent me an email on like some significant day in church history saying, here are the significant features or figures in church history that you are related to. And I found out that I was related to Joseph Smith through marriage because Fanny Alger is my like 6 times great grandmother. And that is literally how I found out that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, because, you know, the Gospel Topics essays came out at the time when Cammie and I had just got married. I'd started law school. I didn't have time to dig into all of that stuff, and I wasn't paying attention. It's as simple as that. And
I know the church's position seems to be that anybody that Joseph fooled around with, he must have been married to.
Well, they need to make that case. That's why.
Yeah, that's the Fanny Alger case.
Exactly.
So let's put this up here for just one more second. We already talked about the logical fallacies it engages in, and this is the number one. It may be number 2. You already caught one, but for me, it's number 1 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks. This is from his first chapter, The False Dilemma or false dichotomy, the either or fallacy, also called the fallacy of the excluded middle. It means you say there's only two possibilities on either end of the spectrum and you ignore the entire bell curve in between. But he has it in his book, discussing an issue as if there are only two alternatives and no compromises. And yet, hasn't he just committed that fallacy himself in the very book in which he lays forward this fallacy?
Oh, yeah. And he commits this fallacy all of the time.
He also talked in that first paragraph about critics and how they were making these invidious comparisons between Joseph Smith and Warren Jeffs. And they were just totally unalike, right? They had nothing to do with each other. Well, let's see. At the age of 37, when he already had at least 25 wives, Warren Jeffs told a 14-year-old girl that if she married him, she and all her family would be exalted in heaven. No, wait, pardon me, my mistake. That was Joseph Smith. I always get the two mixed up.
Well, he also acts like, the way he phrases that, he acts like a comparison to Warren Jeffs is completely inapt, which this slide helps point out isn't. But the other thing that's so weird about that from Austin's perspective is, like, Warren Jeffs believes that Joseph Smith was a prophet. Like, he's a direct outgrowth of Joseph Smith's polygamy. And it's not like it's not like critics pick someone who believes in Islam who is guilty of polygamy or some type of child marriage or something like that. It's like a 1-to-1 comparison, and to pretend like it's not is very odd to me.
Here was another one I found as far as comparisons go. And I think that really Joseph Smith does very well in these comparisons, because Joseph Smith had 34 total wives. I know there's a range there between 33 and 40 or so, but let's just say 34 for purposes of this comparison. Well, Warren Jeffs has him outstripped at 78 wives. So really, Joseph Smith is a pretty good guy compared to Warren Jeffs. The age of the youngest wife, Warren Jeffs' youngest bride was 12 years old. Joseph Smith waited until they were 14 at least. That's a positive in Joseph Smith's column. Let's see, other men's wives. Warren Jeffs married 21 women who were married to other men. Joseph Smith, only 11. He's looking better and better all the time. I think he is a prophet. Mother-daughter pairs, Warren Jeffs did 7 of those. Can you imagine 7? Joseph Smith, only 1. Virtuous Joseph only married 1 mother-daughter pair. Biological sister wives. I'm guessing these are always going to be even numbers. 56, unless there's triplets. 56 for Warren Jeffs, biological sister wives. So in other words, marrying sisters, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were never such devoted sisters. Joseph Smith did that only with 8. And Warren Jeffs, under age 18. So under age 18 wives, 24. Joseph Smith, only 7. I don't know why Austin Fife doesn't want to invite this comparison, because Joseph Smith fares so well.
Oh, yes. He comes off smelling like a rose compared to Warren Jeffs.
Yeah. I would, if I were an apologist still, I would be leading with this and saying, see how good Joseph Smith was? Oh, this is the second one of Austin's rules that he himself breaks. Could you read this one? I think it's double standard.
Yes, the double standard, or special pleading, is the way I would phrase it. Treating 2 or more people or circumstances differently, even though they should be treated the same. That's an interesting should. Even the way he phrased that is fallacious. That's funny. Christians will use a double standard.
And you don't even have to go in all that crap. I just want to demonstrate that he has put in his freaking book these logical fallacies, which he himself is bound and determined to violate each and every one of, at least once in the rest of his book.
Yes.
So that's the double standard I'm talking about. Is, yeah, it's a double standard. It's bad if Warren Jeffs does it, but if Joseph Smith does it, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And now we get to the next excerpt from the Light on Truth letter. Could you read the first couple of paragraphs on that one, Kolby?
You got it. If Joseph was married and then having sex with other men's wives, why were no complaints filed against the prophet from those men whose wives he was sealed to? Because the women couldn't complain, RFM. They don't get to say. How come none of the married...
You're right. You're right. It is throughout, isn't it? It's built in.
It's terrible. Like, there is nothing more revealing of the sexist nature of Mormon polygamy than a man trying to defend it by only ever talking about the man's experience. It's so crazy to me that he didn't see this coming. How
Well,
come
he includes women in the second question.
Yeah, how come none of the married women and their husbands ever claimed that Joseph participated in polyandry?
Is he arguing that there, you see, and this is the part where this chapter is mindlessly crazy. It's just all conflicting because it's like he went and collected all these different things from apologetics about plural marriage and just threw them all together. Is he questioning whether polyandry occurred? I don't think he is. He already admitted that Joseph Smith married women that were married to other men, right? In fact, he said the first two in Nauvoo.
And that's why I think yes. And that's why I think the way he's asking this question is so incredibly dishonest, because when you phrase it like that, how come none of the married women and their husbands ever claimed that Joseph participated in polyandry? The clear import of the answer of the question is, therefore, polyandry didn't occur. But he's already admitted that that happened. So what he's doing here is playing this game where he's using some obscure data point or some obscure, question of fact, and then telling the technical truth about that, while the way he's phrased the question makes that technical truth extremely misleading and will give someone a very inaccurate impression about what the facts actually are.
Yes. And he's arguing against himself in this chapter. He goes on to say there is no evidence that the saints and Joseph participated in polyandry. What is he doing? Does he not know what polyandry means? Or is he simply, he's already admitted that Joseph Smith married two women who were 7 months pregnant when he married them. They were married to other men. So where did this came from? I have no idea. Does this look like AI to you?
You and I have had this discussion a few times, both on and off the air. To me, it doesn't have the hallmarks of AI writing, but it is very hard for me to understand how he's made a lot of the errors that he makes. So I guess that's the best way I can put it, because you're right. This whole section right here disagrees with what he's already written and what he's already admitted to. I think that, I don't know if he used AI to do the actual writing, but what's clear to me is that this entire book, like all of these footnotes, are just other people's recycled arguments. So I don't know if it's a consequence of the use of AI or if it's a consequence of just taking all the apologetics he'd ever heard, blending them up in a blender, and then not recognizing that, like, if you make certain arguments, that forecloses you from making certain other arguments. I don't know, but what's very clear to me is it isn't a serious effort.
Then he says, so what are the seedlings to married women about? Maybe to try and give him the best effort to try and understand what he's saying. He's saying it's not polyandry because Joseph Smith didn't have sex with these women. He was sealed to them, but he wasn't married to them. So it's not polyandry. If that's the argument he's making, he should, I think, spell it out.
Right.
If Joseph, and also it's kind of ridiculous, right? If Joseph was if he's married to women who are married to other men, that's called adultery and polyandry. If Joseph was having lots of sex with lots of women, why were there no children born to Joseph from one of his plural wives, despite him clearly being fertile? Now, remember that he says this, okay? If Joseph Smith was having lots of sex with lots of women, why were there no children born to Joseph from one of his plural wives? Remember that because later on, he's going to admit and concede the fact that Joseph did have sex with at least some of his plural wives.
The other thing about the way that apologists phrase this question in particular, and Austin falls prey to this too, that's very misleading, is we don't know that there are no children born to Joseph from any of these plural wives. What we do know is that the ones that have been tested, that have been like DNA tested and DNA testing has been done, we haven't found evidence that Joseph Smith does have children with any of those plural wives. Those are different things because we haven't, just like they say for DNA in the Book of Mormon, right? Well, we haven't run everybody's DNA, so we don't actually know. It just shows, like, when the evidence, the lack of evidence breaks in their favor, they use it one way, and when it breaks not in their favor, they use it exactly the other way. Just like you said with the double standard or special pleading that Austin is engaged in with Joseph Smith and Warren Jeffs. We see it here also.
Yeah, now this argument makes sense about no children being identified by DNA with Joseph Smith. Makes sense coming from Michelle Stone.
Right.
And the people saying Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy. But why is it in a chapter in a letter that admits that Joseph Smith did have sex with at least some of his wives? And we'll get to that in a second, and then you'll see it. It's kind of like the thing he did before, where he's internally contradicting himself.
It is also funny that he has in the parentheses there, he had 9 children with Emma, even with long periods of time apart and challenging schedules. Yeah, the guy had 30-something wives. Their schedules were rather challenging.
That's what all of his wives said.
That's right.
So I wanted to go to this idea about the no complaints filed against the prophet at the beginning, right? If Joseph was married and then having sex with other men's wives, why were no complaints filed against the prophet from the men whose wives he was sealed to? Well, let's not restrict it so much. And let's just look at this one, okay? No complaints filed against the prophet. Well, this is from the Joseph Smith Papers website. It's the state of Illinois versus Joseph Smith, where he was charged with adultery and fornication. I won't go through this whole thing, but these are quotes right from the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Could you read the historical introduction to this case, Kolby?
On May 23rd, 1844, so we're like about a month out from Joseph Smith's martyrdom, right? A grand jury
before?
Yes.
Yes.
A grand jury for the Hancock County, Illinois Circuit Court indicted Joseph Smith for adultery and fornication with Maria Lawrence, whom later historical sources identified as a plural wife of Joseph Smith, and with certain women to the jurors unknown.
Okay, if you'll hang on a second. May of 1844, Joseph Smith was indicted for having sex with one of his plural wives, Maria Lawrence. And what was it you said here in your question, Austin? If Joseph was married and then having sex with other men's wives, I don't think this was necessarily another man's wife. But he says, why were no complaints filed against the prophet? Well, the answer is there were. And this is one of them. It's not the only one, but it's a very famous one. Now, I interrupted you. If you'd continue, please.
Yeah, Joseph Smith was appointed the legal guardian of the children of Edward Lawrence, including Maria, in 1841. Oh, this is just disgusting. Although Maria resided with her mother and stepfather for a time after her father's death, she began living with Joseph Smith's family around 1843 and was sealed to Joseph Smith in May of that year when she was 19 years old. The other women referred to in the indictment were likely women to whom Joseph Smith was sealed, whose names were unknown or unavailable when the indictment was created.
Now, there's going to be a lot more detail in slides that I made. Let's not go too in-depth in this. The point of bringing it up is to answer Austin's question. He has complained before that we haven't spent enough time answering his questions. Well, that's the answer to that question. There were complaints filed against Joseph Smith.
And this is
plural marriage.
This note that we just read, to Austin's point of the false dichotomy he framed the chapter with, this historical introduction is written by the scholars at the Joseph Smith Papers Project, who are telling us that at best, Joseph Smith shifted this legal guardian / parental relationship with Maria Lawrence from caretaker legal guardian after her father has passed into plural polygamist wife at 19. This is not only coming from critics. This is coming right from the best scholars available to the church at the Joseph Smith Papers Project.
Very good. Then it goes on. I'm not going to go into these details, but you can find it at the Joseph Smith Papers Project very easily. And here is something where this is also from the article where it says Joseph Smith appears to deny what modern historians agree on, that Maria Lawrence was indeed one of Joseph Smith's plural wives. This was his response to getting served with this lawsuit, where he publicly condemned William and Wilson Law for their role in the adultery indictment days after it was issued, claiming the indictment was of the devil, all corruption, and calling them false swearers. So apparently he's denying the allegations, and those allegations about being married to Maria Lawrence is something that modern historians agree on, that he was married to her.
And this just goes hand in hand with the fact that William and Wilson Law worked on the Nauvoo Expositor, or were working on the Nauvoo Expositor, and time has vindicated them, not Joseph Smith. Time has vindicated that they were not false swearers and corrupt in what they said.
By the way, an interesting coincidence is that exactly 1 month to the day before he was murdered in Carthage, Joseph Smith traveled to Carthage, Illinois on 27 May 1844 to answer indictments of perjury and adultery at the Hancock County Circuit Court. So he posted a bond, $100, or at least that was the laws, because he countersued them, right? Because they were the ones who were lying. Anyway, the whole thing gets dismissed in October after Joseph Smith is dead and the whole thing's moot. But that was the charge that was filed against him. Oh, Joseph Smith uses the law to retaliate against the laws and foster. So let me go ahead and get back to the Light on Truth letter. Can you read this this snippet? I think this is an important snippet from the Light on Truth letter.
Yeah, that isn't to say that Joseph had no sexual relations with any of his wives.
What?
Clearly,
What? Wait a second. What? Hang on.
Yeah.
Could you read that again?
Yeah, it's so crazy that it follows after what we've already read. That isn't to say that Joseph Smith had no sexual relations with any of his wives, but clearly the narrative that it was all about sex is weak.
Whose narrative is that, by the way, Kolby? Is that your narrative?
That is not my narrative. No.
It's not my narrative, too. So I wonder who he's talking about. Oh, wait, this is the straw man he created.
That's right. It must be those other critics that he is talking to. If not for sex, then what is the motive for the sealing practices in Nauvoo and Kirtland? Oh, Kirtland, which preceded Nauvoo, which just helps show that even Austin knows that there was polygamy going on in Kirtland before his Nauvoo example that he used to try and pretend like that was the first polygamous wives.
Good point. Although he puts Kirtland after Nauvoo to confuse the chronology.
Yeah.
What I said about this below is here Austin gives away the game by agreeing that Joseph Smith did have sexual relations with at least some of his plural wives. Many of the arguments he makes in this chapter fall apart upon this admission, like the one he just made about DNA. And this is the line I was thinking of and anticipating that was going to conflict with the DNA. Why do you care if DNA hasn't shown any descendants of Joseph Smith through plural wives when you're already admitting he had sex with at least some of them?
Right.
Now we get a big fat paragraph. This is about the law of adoption, dynasty sealings, eternity only sealings. See, this is the real reason that Joseph Smith was marrying teenagers, marrying women who were already married to other men, and pretty much everybody he could see in a skirt. He has over 30 plural wives. But it's not about sex, see? This is the real reason. It's all these non-sexual things that they've come up with. Can you read this?
Yep, I'm happy to. The law of adoption, I would say dynastic sealings, eternity-only sealings. And this comes really straight from Brian Hales. It feels like to me all of this type of
He's in his footnotes.
Yeah. Joseph Smith was passionate about creating an unbroken chain of families bound together and sealed up to God. And he couldn't do that without marrying teenagers. This seems to be the driving force behind his actions in Kirtland and Nauvoo. Parley Pratt reports that in 1839, Joseph was teaching the apostles about the sealing power and the eternal family organization. Surprisingly, sealings were not performed for deceased relatives until 1894. Up to that point, members participated in sealings to other living members of the church in what is called the law of adoption, or dynastic sealings. Without the ability or practice of being sealed to one's deceased ancestors, early saints sought to be sealed and linked to someone, commonly a church leader. For a time, there was the practice of sealing married women to other men. Hey, he did it right that time. Families to other families, siblings to other siblings, and even men to other men. Eternity-only sealings is a term coined by historians to describe marriages of an already married woman whose husband was not a member of the church. There is no indication that eternity-only sealings had any of the standard marital expectations of other traditional marriages or standard plural marriages. Thus, a marriage or a sealing did not necessarily imply a sexual or marital relationship.
But he concedes that at least some of them did.
Right.
So what was this whole paragraph about? I don't know.
Well, this whole paragraph is an attempt at being technically correct and nothing more. He's just saying it didn't necessarily mean that it involved sex. Okay, acknowledged. But if some of them did,
yeah,
that's the ones I want to
open that door that wide. You know, it's like what is it? They say that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. Well, that's at least a number of steps down that journey.
Right.
And this is what I thought. This is actually something that came to me, and I don't know if it's right. So this is pure speculation, okay?
I
But it's
thought it
written.
was I thought it was very brilliant when I was reading it last night. So I hope it's right.
Oh, would you read it then? Maybe it'll sound better when you
Well,
read it.
it's your idea.
Okay. Well, with that attribution, you can go ahead and read it.
Why did these dynastic sealings end in 1894 at the same time plural marriage was announced as being discontinued, 1890?
Okay,
Could
I'll
there
continue, and then you can tell me. Could there possibly be a connection, especially because it's hard to read? This was white lettering. I used Brigham Young as a background. White was the best thing that would show up. Other colors were even worse. Could there possibly be a connection between the two, i.e., the dynastic sealings ending in 1894 and plural marriage being announced as being ended in 1890? 4 years separate them. Is the connection between dynastic sealings and plural marriage so strong that the church really couldn't have one without the other? It is almost like dynastic sealings are a cover for plural marriage. I mean, even in real time when they're doing it. Dynastic sealings are so tied up in plural marriage that it is probably naive to try to distinguish the two as Austin Fife does, taking his cue from Brian Hales. I.e., the early Utah Saints weren't practicing plural marriage, they were engaged in dynastic sealings. That's his argument. But when it seems like they're kind of the same thing, and dynastic sealings is what they were going under in having plural marriage, then maybe they're not that easily distinguished at all.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have to look into again. I think it was Wilford Woodruff that ended the dynastic sealings, right, in 1894. I would
Yes.
want to look at the reasons behind that a little bit closer, but I think there's probably something there if we dig into this in the future. I would bet we can find something that helps support this idea because it is kind of an interesting possible connection you've noted here.
Thank you. Going on, I've asked some of my own questions. Does Austin think a man using religion to access multiple sexual partners is going to say he's using religion to access multiple sexual partners? Does he not realize that that would be strange, and there's usually a cover story? There's always going to be a cover story. And within a religious paradigm, such as Mormonism, that cover story will typically be religious in nature.
Yeah,
we're not doing this to have sex with these women. We're doing it for some other religious and holy reason.
Yeah, as a kind of a meta point, I know you're aware, and probably some of the listeners are aware, but Utah is the affinity fraud capital of the world. Like the FBI has a special headquarters there that looks at affinity and financial fraud. And let me connect the dots that I see here. It's because the way that Austin is framing this chapter, and I'm not saying that he's doing this completely knowingly, like this is the way that you're raised in this church, is you overemphasize intention. And what I mean by that is you think that if people have good intention, if the church leaders have good intention, if Joseph has good intention, then he can't be doing bad things. He can't be doing wrong things. And when you leave the church, or at least I'll just speak for me, when I left the church and I matured a little bit, I recognized that both in my own behavior and in other people's behavior, obviously bad intention is going to lead to bad outcomes, but good intention doesn't always guarantee good outcomes. And one of the hardest lessons I think I've had to learn, especially in my family relationships with my wife and with my kids, is that sometimes I can have the best intentions and still have a bad effect on them, or still, hurt them with my words unknowingly, whatever it is. And recognizing that, I think, helps you recognize that even if I were to concede the point that Joseph Smith was just deluded and really believed all of this stuff about trying to connect to the grand human family, that does not mean that he can't have done bad things with good intention. And it seems to me like Mormons don't recognize that. And I think that is why I see that data point as connected, that Utah is the affinity fraud capital of the world, because they are so susceptible to that, because they overemphasize this good intention in the people that they often then end up losing their money to in these financial fraud schemes.
That's an interesting connection that you've made there too. Then I write, it's okay, because even though sex was involved, it wasn't the primary motivator. That's kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's his argument.
Yeah.
Everything's okay with Joseph Smith because even though Austin admits sex was involved. It wasn't the primary motivator. It was something else. It was his dynastic ceilings.
Right. And what he's implicitly saying there is as long as Joseph Smith wasn't primarily motivated by sex, he can be partially motivated by sex and still be a prophet. As long as there wasn't primary motivation by sex, that's his only falsifiable criteria. And it's like, well, okay. If that's
why I called it a crappy chapter, the crappiest chapter in a crappy book.
Yeah.
But somebody's got to point this out. Now, do you remember the show Roots that was on TV back in the 1970s, Kolby?
Yes, I've only seen like one episode, I think, but I know LeVar Burton, right, was the...
This was back when, I mean, he was unknown, at least to me at the time, but he went on to do Star Trek: The Next Generation, Reading Rainbow, other things I'm sure that I don't know about.
Kunta Kinte, right?
Whoa, are you kidding me? Yeah. Lives on kind of in The Lion King where he holds up the cub. I think they did something similar with Kunta Kinte when he was born. His dad holds him up to the stars and everything. They had all these famous actors in it, and I can see a lot of them here. We won't stroll down memory lane, except to say that at the time, it's the late 70s, Alex Haley now, he's not only written the book, huge bestseller, they make this miniseries out of it. And the Mormons are all over it because this is about genealogy. Remember, he goes back through his family, all the way back to Africa. And Mormons are looking at this as, wow, genealogy, we've got that. In fact, we were first on board with genealogy because of those keys being given to us from Elijah in the temple. And frequently, at the time, the Mormons would say, they would point to this coincidence in timing, okay, as evidence that Elijah really did show up and really did give those keys and start the whole family history deal in Mormonism in the 1830s, because only 10 years later, in 1845, the New England Historical Genealogical Society was organized. It's the oldest and largest genealogical society in the United States, founded in 1845. So you can see how Mormons are seeing this as a result of Elijah coming 10 years earlier. And now people are ready to get their names and find their ancestors.
Was it Elijah or Elias? I always get those two mixed up.
I think it's Elijah with the ceiling and Elias with the who knows what. I can't remember.
I'm joking because they're the same person. It's just
okay.
Greek or Hebrew. Yeah.
Well, Elijah left for a bit, put on a mask, and came back as Elijah.
It was actually a funny mustache. He put on a funny mustache and came back.
Very good with the Groucho Marx glasses.
That's right.
The reason I bring this up is because, oh, wait a second. The reason I bring this up, I'm sorry, I don't have a conclusion slide. I'm expecting myself to remember the conclusion. The conclusion is this, okay, that sounds like an interesting argument, although it's obviously coincidental. But what I did not hear when I was hearing that argument being made was that it wasn't until 1894 that the church started using genealogy and sealing people to their ancestors. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the church is like 50 years late instead of 10 years early to that particular game.
Right.
If we're keying off the 1845 creation of the first genealogical society. Now this one, we're continuing with the Light on Truth letter. And I say, I wonder is not an argument. Can I read the first paragraph and then you the second?
Great.
Austin writes, it is worth noting that the saints' understanding of adoption in Brigham Young's day contributed to the solidarity and interdependence. By the way, that sound that you're hearing is the sound of Austin pulling something out of his ass. He says it's worth noting that the saints' understanding of adoption in Brigham Young's day contributed to the solidarity and interdependence that helped them cross the plains to Utah. They wouldn't have made it without marrying, multiple wives. In other words, the saints' understanding of the law of adoption as a social order likely helped them survive.
Can we stop on that sentence for a second?
Well, he's emphasized it, so it's really important for his argument.
Yeah. The clear example I thought of is like, what society could you not say this about? Like, even about a barbaric practice, like Spartans leaving the what we're viewed by them as the weaker child out to the cold, to the elements.
Oh, they had a cavern, an underground cavern where they throw the bodies of the malformed children right after they were born.
Right. And couldn't you say the exact same thing about the Spartans and that barbaric practice? You absolutely could. That
It
it
made
was
them stronger as a
yeah,
society. That was the whole point. They
right.
were a warrior society. Yeah.
That it was part of their social order that helped them survive. This is actually an additional fallacy. I don't know if it's in Austin's first chapter, but this is basically the naturalist fallacy, which is if something exists in this like natural state or it's evolved over time in a society sociologically, that it is therefore good. The naturalist fallacy is I look out and I see what exists and assume that that's the way things likely should be.
It's not in his list. I know because I went over it recently, like
Okay.
yesterday, making these slides. But no, that's a great fallacy. By the way, it also strikes me that kind of what he's doing here is creating an etiology. He's creating a backstory. In other words, he wants to say Mormons have better families today than other people. And why is that? Why is that? Well, it's not because of the teachings of the church today. It's
Right.
not because they've been raised with teachings of the church. It's because over 100 years ago, some people in the same church, some of whom may have been their ancestors, practice polygamy. That's why Mormons have stronger traditional families today. And that's where I see him myth making.
And like stupid myth making. Like Mormons have stronger traditional families today because they didn't have traditional families in the past. That's the effect of the argument. Like that would be an alternative family structure in the parlance of today. So we have really strong traditional families because we didn't have really strong traditional families in the past. That's just a crazy story. I don't know.
His last line is the one that evokes the title to this slide, the last line of the first paragraph. Further, he writes, further, I wonder how much benefit from the law of adoption we still reap today in our ward families. Do you wonder about that ever, Kolby?
Well, I wonder why you would need an argument like this, or you would need something like the law of adoption to teach you to love people in your ward family. It's funny that that's as far as apparently Austin's like circle of charity extends as the people in his ward family. When we're taught from just the foundations of Christian scripture that all of us are God's children and we're all siblings because of that, why would you need something more than being taught that we're all already God's family?
It's a good point. And I will tell you that this is the crux, really. If there is a crux in this chapter, this is the crux of the chapter. This is what Austin has to demonstrate, because his real argument is going to be that polygamy was good and from God because it created stronger families a century later.
Which is, again, another fallacy argument from consequences. I'll continue with this second paragraph. In the spirit of ongoing revelation, Wilford Woodruff revealed that the saints could perform proxy sealing work and seal themselves to their ancestors. This change ended the need for the law of adoption altogether in the late 19th century in favor of sealing children to their parents.
There it is. You know, you get to a certain point in Mormonism where completely changing things on the part of the prophets doesn't even cause you to bat an eye anymore.
Right.
It's like, what was God thinking up until 1894?
Yeah. Whoever could have thought that we should seal children to their parents? Weird.
It's a weird idea. And then on the next page, this continues his chapter. And I say very little evidence. That's an expression he uses here. He writes, when I learned about the law of adoption, dynasty sealings, and eternity only sealings, the once salacious headlines regarding polygamy in the early church lost its shock value. How does anything about any of these three ideas, the law of adoption, how does that change the shock value of polygamy?
They don't change any of the details. He's already talked about how the dynasty sealings was just some of the marriages. Eternity only sealings was the exact same way. Law of adoption didn't affect the salacious parts of polygamy that we're talking about. All three of those examples are non sequiturs. So the fact that it caused him to lose his shock value over polygamy in the church shows that he doesn't understand anything about it.
So apparently the polygamy has lost a lot of its shock value for Austin. I wonder if it ever lost the shock value for the women involved.
I don't think he cares about that as much.
I think he's trying to score points. He's trying to make this okay in some way. He goes on, for example, Joseph Smith's youngest polygamous wife was 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, period. Though marriage at 14 would have been more acceptable on the frontier in the 1840s, that is still fairly young. Yeah, especially when you're 37 years old and already married to 12 other women. However, and this is underlined by you, I think. However, Helen reports that she was sealed to the prophet at the behest of her father, Heber C. Kimball, who had a, quote, great desire to be connected with the prophet, period, end of quote. Why did you underline that?
Well, I underlined that because I will elaborate on that in the next couple of slides after you finish here.
I think that basically he's really focusing on Heber and not Helen.
That is the point, is I can think of nothing more revealing of the fruits of Mormon polygamy than the fact that Austin is going to tell us that we should care about Heber C. Kimball's feelings about Helen Marr's 14-year-old marriage, or marriage at the time she was 14, to Joseph Smith, more than we should even care about what Helen says. And so I'm going to actually tell you what Helen says in the next couple of slides.
Oh, great. I'll finish saying what Austin says on this slide. These details line up with what I've come to understand about the law of adoption. And at the bottom, I ask the question, hey, I'm going to ask you a question, okay, Austin? So why didn't Joseph adopt Helen Mar Kimball as his daughter? If that's the law of adoption going on, why doesn't he adopt her as his daughter? Why does he insist on marrying her? I'll put a little green arrow next to that one for you. He says further, there is a very little evidence to support the claim that Joseph Smith had sexual relations with Helen. That's where I said very little evidence. There's very little evidence to support the claim. Why is he marrying her, Austin?
Yeah.
You don't have to get married not to have sex with somebody.
Helen Mar is such a problem for apologists. Doesn't Brian Hales acknowledge that they likely did have a sexual relationship?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not that familiar with his writings, and I don't know if he would say when it began. There isn't a whole lot of evidence. I mean, what evidence do I have that you engage in sexual relations other than the mirrors on the bedroom ceiling? And that's all I have.
And the 3 kids.
You've got some kids. They could have come from the store. I don't know where they came from. But other than kids, right?
No, you're making a great point, which is a lot of times when apologists say stuff like Austin just said right here, there's very little evidence. It's like, well, what are you expecting? They didn't have video cameras. They didn't have social media. People weren't logging every move they made. A lot of times we get these late autobiographical accounts like the one I'm going to share from Helen Mar, because that's what they had. Like, I don't understand what evidence they're expecting to find. Like bed sheets of Joseph Smith where it's scrawled Helen was here. Like, what exactly evidence are they expecting to exist of sexual relations with Helen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making now. Yeah, it's ridiculous to claim this.
Well, he wants to ask this question. Why do critics harp on the headline-catching details of polygamy when the details are fairly limited? I got to stop right here with this nonsense about fairly limited. I think Brian Hales filled up 3 big volumes with the details and the evidence about plural marriage, didn't he? Wasn't it a 3-volume work?
I thought it was actually more than that. I thought maybe it was 4.
Well, there's one where he collects, and Don Bradley helped him a lot, going to different places and collecting all the evidence that there was about plural marriage in Joseph Smith's day. I don't think this is supposed to be in Utah. I could be wrong about that. But there's so much evidence that it fills 3 volumes. And that doesn't sound fairly limited to me. But he wants it to be fairly limited. So he asks the question, why do critics harp on the headline-catching details, i.e. other men's wives, i.e. teenagers as young as 14, when the details are fairly limited, and what limited evidence we have points to the law of adoption, dynastic sealings, and eternity-only sealings? Where did he establish that?
He didn't, but it sure makes him feel better.
This is argument by assertion, really.
Right.
Now we get to your slide.
So here's that. If you'll go back one slide, just to remind people. So the part I had emphasized was, this is the quote from Heber C., or how Heber C. felt about it, from a quote from Helen from her later, I think it's 1881, autobiographical memories. The phrase was, had a great desire to be connected with the prophet. What I wanted to show is the rest of the quote, because that's the only part that Austin shares with you. So if you'll go forward. So this is what she describes in her autobiographical account. Having a great desire to be connected with the prophet Joseph Smith, he offered me to him, he being her father, this I afterwards learned from the prophet's own mouth. My father had but one ewe lamb, but willingly laid her upon the altar. How cruel this seemed to the mother whose heartstrings were already stretched until they were ready to snap asunder.
Now, notice that right here, she's describing what her mother went through.
Exactly. And Austin's, if we go back to that Reddit quote from the beginning of Austin's chapter, he wonders why we feel like this is I'm sorry, you don't have to actually go there. I just mean in memory. He wonders why we think this is a sexist system. He wonders why we think this is an abusive system, a disgusting system. Listen to these words of how these women felt about this situation. Now, I will absolutely validate and say, because I'm accurate to the evidence, that they'll then turn around and say that they feel like they've been blessed for their participation in polygamy, but that's because they've already begged the question that they believe it comes from God. When you actually read the words of what they're talking about, it's obvious that they're going through these heartbreaking ordeals involved in the entirety of this affair. So, yes, she stated her mother's heartstrings were already stretched until they were ready to snap asunder, for he had taken Sarah Noon to wife, and she thought she had made sufficient sacrifice. So I think the he there is Heber C. had been married to a second wife, and that caused, what was her name? Sarah Ann? Was it Sarah Ann?
I'll look it up, but yeah, the mother of Helen Mar and the first wife of Heber C.
Oh, it's Violet. It's Violet Kimball.
Okay.
Violet Kimball. So she thought she had made sufficient sacrifice, but the Lord required more. I will pass over the temptations which I had during the 24 hours after my father introduced me to this principle and asked me.
Why is she passing over them?
Right, because she doesn't want to talk about the hard stuff.
Yes. Go ahead.
And yet she still talks about a lot of hard stuff. There's more hard stuff, Austin, that remained unsaid. I will pass over the temptations which I had during the 24 hours after my father introduced me to this principle and asked me if I would be sealed to Joseph. 24 hours for a 14-year-old girl to make this decision, and listen to the stakes and the way it was introduced to her, who came next morning, and with my parents, I heard him teach and explain the principle of celestial marriage, after which he said to me, if you take this step, it will ensure your eternal salvation and exaltation, and that of your father's household and all of your kindred. This promise was so great that I willingly gave myself to purchase so glorious a reward. This poor girl was so broken at this time that she viewed herself as property, as currency, by saying that she offered herself to purchase this glorious reward. You can see how damaging, sexist, and disgusting this system was in what she wrote.
What I'm reading is a blatant attempt on Joseph Smith's part to use his religious office to manipulate her and to coerce her into accepting his proposal of plural marriage. And she writes that that's the reason she did it.
Mm-hmm. And she said, none but God and his angels could see my mother's bleeding heart when Joseph asked her if she was willing. She replied, if Helen is willing, I have nothing more to say. She had witnessed the suffering of others who were older and better understood the step they were taking, meaning other women who were sealed to these older men. And to see her child, who had scarcely seen her 15th summer, following in the same thorny path, in her mind she saw the misery which was as sure to come as the sun was to rise and set, but it was all hidden from me. Then,
so she's tacitly admitting to all the misery that she endured because of this.
Exactly. And it continues. In her autobiographical account, she has this passage, and then it follows by this poem on the next page. Do you want to read the first column, and I will read the second?
Okay, so this is Helen Mar Kimball in later life writing a poem about this experience?
Correct.
I thought through this life my time will be my own. The step I am now taking is for eternity alone. No one need be the wiser. Through time I shall be free. And as the past hath been, the future still will be. To my guileless heart, all free from worldly care, and full of blissful hopes and youthful visions rare, the world seemed bright, the threatening clouds were kept from sight, and all looked fair, but pitying angels wept. They saw my youthful friends grow shy and cold, and poisonous darts from slanderous tongues were hurled. Untutored heart, in thy generous sacrifice, thou didst not weigh the cost, nor know the bitter price. Thy happy dreams all over, thou art doomed, alas, to be barred out from social scenes by this thy destiny. So she can't go anywhere. She's 14. She can't go to dances. She certainly can't be courted by anybody. She's married to Joseph on the sly. So now she has to be a recluse at home and not experience youth the way all of her friends are.
Right. And remember the way this started, which is Austin is telling us that we don't have to be bothered about Joseph's marriage to Helen Marr because Heber C. Kimball was okay with it. Yet in Helen's own mouth, and this isn't contemporaneous, this is after reflection where she's, I would say, softened on this over time, because it ends with her saying, and I'm so glad that I have these eternal promises on the basis of this great sacrifice I've made. That's how she ends, right? But she's thinking about angels weeping over, pitying her over this situation. And Austin wants us to think that it's okay because her dad then was okay with it. That's disgusting and ridiculous. I'll finish out the second column of this poem. And o'er thy saddened memories of sweet departed joys, thy sickened heart will brood and imagine future woes. And like a fettered bird with wild and longing heart, thou'lt daily pine for freedom and murmur at thy lot. But couldst thou see the future and view that glorious crown awaiting you in heaven, you would not weep nor mourn. This again is what you were saying. The religious manipulation worked on her. Pure and exalted.
It was the only reason she did it, in spite of all of the travail she went through because of it. That was her only saving hope.
And it wasn't even just the religious promises. Listen to who the religious promises had to come from. That's how this closes. Pure and exalted was thy father's aim, he saw, a glory in obeying this high celestial law. For to thousands who've died without the light, I will bring eternal joy and make thy crown more bright. I'd been taught to receive the prophet of God and receive every word as the word of the Lord, that had this not come through my dear father's mouth, I should ne'er have received it as God's sacred truth. So what Helen Marr is really saying is Joseph Smith making these promises wasn't enough. It was Heber C. who needed to assure her that this was the right thing to do to guarantee salvation and exaltation for the thousands in their family line that had come before them. That is what made her recognize it. So when you understand that, and you understand how Helen Marr actually felt, Austin's shifting the focus to Heber C. becomes all the more disgusting. If you'll go forward one slide, I would say there is no better evidence of the sexist fruits of Mormon polygamy than Austin's disgusting effort to excuse Joseph's marriage to 14-year-old Helen Marr Kimball by telling you that her dad was cool with it, while knowingly cutting short her own words about the difficulties and heartbreak it caused her and her mother. Because remember, all I did is finish out the quote here, guys. The claymation image on the right was AI's best attempt to show the fruit of a sexist tree. So those frowning men are supposed to be the sexist men that grow out of this rotten practice of polygamy.
It's the patriarchy tree.
It's the patriarchy tree. That's right. So to come back to that quote that just started all of this, Austin wonders why we think this is an abusive, disgusting, sexist system. Well, I'm reading the words of Helen Marr, and it sure sounds that way to me.
Very good. Thank you for adding that.
Oh, and I was going to add this sexism in Doctrine and Covenants 132, again, that I opened with saying this bothered me enough when I was on my mission that I recognized I didn't think it came from the God I believed in. It mirrors Old Testament patterns where women are exchanged as property in Exodus 21. They are compensated for like a damaged asset in Deuteronomy 22. They are assigned in marriage without their own consent, Genesis 29, or they are required to continue bearing children until they hit male lineage, Deuteronomy 25. The worst story, I guess my point here is, this is one of the worst things I think Mormonism ever did by justifying polygamy by looking back at the Old Testament, because the Old Testament ethic literally treated women as property. This story in particular is one of the most disturbing to me. When David, a lot of people know the story of David and Bathsheba, right? The wife of the Hittite. What a lot of people do not know, because especially Mormons are usually not very biblically literate, is that David was punished for that by Nathan the prophet. And according to what is recorded in 2 Samuel, this is the punishment, according to what God said in the Old Testament. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun. For thou didst secretly, but I will do this thing before all of Israel and before the sun. And then David's son Absalom, I believe is the name, in a few chapters later, rapes 10 of David's wives on the roof of the palace to fulfill this prophecy. I don't believe that that actually comes from God, obviously, but my point here is that the Old Testament ethos towards women is that they are property, that it is appropriate to rape women to punish them for the wrongs a man did. It's disgusting and abhorrent. And I think linking itself to this Old Testament practice, barbaric practice, is one of the worst things Mormonism has ever done.
Hear, hear. Okay, continuing with the Light on Truth letter. Now we get to the section called the fruits of plural marriage. Because like I said, this is going to be the thrust of his argument. We've got such great fruits from plural marriage that it justifies its existence in the first place. I noted it is illogical to believe modern Mormons could be family-oriented if their ancestors practiced polygamy? ? Note the straw man of one big orgy as well. All right, critics attempt to frame plural marriage as some sort of sexual deviancy among Joseph Smith and other church leaders. I've heard it said it was depravity at its worst. I might say it was depravity at its best. Historian Lawrence Foster, referring to Latter-day Saint history in plural marriage, stated, today, somewhat paradoxically, Mormons are among the most traditional of any group in their attitudes toward family life and the role of women. Yeah, traditional. Couched in Mr. Foster's bewilderment is the flaw in the critic's logic about polygamy. If the history of Nauvoo and early Utah was one big orgy, straw man alert, if it was one big orgy, why are the Latter-day Saints some of the most chaste people on the planet? Huh, Kolby? Huh?
The question is such a non sequitur. I don't even know how to go about addressing everything that's wrong with it.
This is one of the reasons that crappy chapters take a lot longer for me to prepare to address. I've been working for days on this. But yeah, what do you make of a question like this when it is a non sequitur? There's no connection between the premise of practicing polygamy and the conclusion about why it is that the Latter-day Saints today have so much better family, social values. He goes on to ask, if polygamy was rooted in sexual opportunism, shouldn't we be seeing those fruits today? What? You mean sexual opportunism? Those fruits? You don't see those today in the Mormon church, Austin? Are you not looking hard enough?
Yeah, go back and look at our abuse in the our response to your abuse in the church chapter and talk about all the stuff you don't understand.
That is really remarkable and revealing, this question. If polygamy was rooted in sexual opportunism, shouldn't we be seeing those fruits today? It's a dumbass question. It's a non sequitur question, but I think it's actually happening. Then, if our heritage is based on sexual conquest, why are the men of the church more devoted to their spouses and children than other religious and non-religious groups? So there's nobody who is more devoted to their spouses and children than Mormon men, apparently.
Did he even make an attempt to Okay.
No.
Cool.
I'm so sorry. Complete your sentence. I'm mind reading the audience.
Oh, that's okay. He didn't even make an attempt to establish that men of the church are more devoted to their spouses and children than other religious and non-religious groups. So I'm not even understanding where the question comes from.
Yeah. It comes from begging the question is where it comes from. And that's another thing that he does. So begging the question, frequently misunderstood logical fallacy. Begging the question is that you usually have two premises in a formal logical construction. You have premise 1, premise 2, and then your conclusion, right? So what he's doing is polygamy was done in the Mormon church. Today, Mormons have much stronger families than we got men who are more devoted to their wives and their kids than anybody else. Okay, those are the two premises. And therefore, his conclusion is that polygamy was good then, and it was from God. This is an evidence for polygamy. But begging the question is not establishing either one of your premises.
Yep.
Your premises have to be correct in order for your conclusion to follow, okay? Notice I said follow, not to be correct. But your premises have to be correct. If you don't establish your premise as being valid, that's begging the question.
Right.
That is the fundamental question of your own argument that you're begging by refusing to address it and establish it, which means that your conclusion is not worth the paper it's written on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go ahead, see what he does to try and establish this. Oh, first off, number 3 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks, one big orgy straw man argument. He has this in his own book, Straw Man. Could you read that, Kolby?
Yeah, of course. Set up the opponent's argument to be weaker than it is, then proceed to demolish the false weak version and claim victory. That is basically the entire Light and Truth letters summed up. It is an entire exercise in straw manning the critical positions by citing exclusively to social media like Reddit posts. Usually he'll selectively pick the most unhinged ex-Mormon Reddit posts on any particular issue. We talked about at the beginning of this episode, even the one he picked there is basically completely accurate with modifying one sentence, just over representing the state of the evidence, I would say. But no, this is not on accident. It's very easy to craft a straw man argument. And then this is why a lot of the current state of especially this younger Mormon online apologetic space is primarily about being against anti-Mormonism or against the critics, is because then all they need to do is straw man the critical position, the real critical position, and pretend like they've, moved the needle in some way. But anyone who isn't already convinced, their arguments are just ridiculous.
Austin goes on to say that anybody who uses a straw man argument is dishonest. It's dishonest because it does not genuinely engage with the opposing party's argument. So explain to me, Kolby, how does Austin write the Light on Truth letter in just this chapter with so much in the way of straw man arguments, when in the very first chapter, he is identifying straw man arguments as dishonest?
That's a great question. It seems like maybe he's more interested in winning points for the home team of like-minded people rather than bringing people closer to the truth, which is rather ironic for a book named The Light and Truth Letter. And for people who weren't following along, I was answering RFM's question by finishing out using Austin as the example of Austin's second sentence in that same section.
Very good. Thank you. And this is another question he has. This is the very next part in his chapter. His entire chapter, I believe, is replicated here, except for the endnotes. And this is a classic non sequitur logical fallacy. You already mentioned non sequitur. Can you read this question from Austin?
Yeah, of course. Suppose I were to believe the narrative that critics relay regarding polygamy in Nauvoo and Utah, the real argument that critics communicate, or the straw man version we just talked about. Why then are Latter-day Saints more educated, have stronger families, have higher levels of fidelity, and have longer lasting marriages? Yeah, there's no connection between these things he's talking about. Like, I've said this before, but it's like the dude needs thinking help. Like I don't understand how he can write so many of these sentences that have no connection between the things that he's talking about in the sentence.
Well, what I want to know is, if my IQ is not over 100, why is the sky blue? That's what I want to know. So non sequitur, it's a great thing to know, to be able to recognize when you use it or when someone else is using it, like here. The definition is the term non sequitur comes from Latin and translates as does not follow. Sequence, sequitur, non, doesn't. A non sequitur occurs if the premises don't justify the conclusion. Example: 1, all trees are tall. 2, all tall things are yellow. See, those are the two premises in the conclusion. Therefore, all trees are green. Boy, that's an extreme version, but I don't think it's any more extreme than what we've just got from Austin. Here's one I like. Can you read this one?
People died of cancer before cigarettes were invented, so smoking doesn't cause cancer. Most times people would say, so smoking can't cause cancer because it existed before smoking. Yeah.
And this also gets into causation, and we'll get into that as well. So here's a classic non sequitur logical fallacy. This is the one we read before. It's the same clip, but I just put it up there again.
Right.
Number 4 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks, the non sequitur. It's in his own book. He writes a conclusion or statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement. Non sequitur is Latin for it does not follow. Did somebody completely different write this chapter?
I don't know. At one point, I actually called out, this was like months ago when we started this. I called out that Austin breaks these rules constantly himself. And it was actually his wife, Tikla, that in some YouTube comment back to me said, the fact that he uses some of those tactics, he never said in the first chapter that you can never use any of those tactics. And it's like, wait, what? You created a list of them, calling them dishonest manipulation tactics and logical fallacies. Why would you ever knowingly use any of them? I think they're just a very confused set of people. I don't know.
I just realized it's a trap.
Explain.
Okay, I know we've been doing this for over a year now, but remember when Austin went on Psych Ward Radio and gleefully said that we fell into his trap?
Oh, the Zosimus trap?
Yes,
The
Zosimus trap. This thing has lots of traps. One of the traps he does is he violates all of these logical fallacies throughout in order to see if we'll find it. And if we find it, I'm sure he'll say we fell into whatever his trap was.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, because at one point when we started this, Austin started calling out how much time we were spending on these responses. And it's very funny to me that if we spend a lot of time pointing out all the problems in his argument, that somehow what makes us irresponsible? I don't really understand it. This has been a lot of fun for us.
Yeah, he doesn't want anybody paying that much attention to his arguments because then they dissect them so thoroughly.
Yeah, I've truly never met someone who wrote a book that is so displeased that someone's actually reading and taking their book seriously.
Well, I can understand it. If I had written this book, I'd be displeased if people like you and I were doing the same thing. So let's go ahead. Let's go to the next one. This is rule number 4 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks. These were some thoughts that I'd had. Mormon men today are better husbands and fathers because their ancestors practiced polygamy. That's the best version of the argument, okay? Because I think a minority of Mormon men today are going to have polygamous ancestors. I don't. Do you? I guess Fanny Alger?
Fanny Alger, I actually don't think I do have any men involved in polygamy in my family line.
Okay. But that's the best case, right? Mormon men today are better husbands and fathers because their ancestors practiced polygamy. And then I said it's...
Or at least I think the case he's making is that polygamy can't have been rooted in sexism and abuse, because look at the men today being such awesome husbands and fathers, I guess, is maybe a similar.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're giving him credit, and I don't think that's the argument he's making.
Mm.
I think you're trying to make his really bad argument not quite so really bad, but it's still really bad. So at which point I commented, it's too bad all Christian denominations didn't practice polygamy at some point, if this argument is correct.
It's
I guess
interesting.
if everybody else had practiced polygamy, Mormons wouldn't have better marriages and families.
Sorry, it's interesting he doesn't talk at all about non-Christian polygamy, because if we're isolating the variable and we're talking about the effect of polygamy, why doesn't he talk about polygamy in Islam or in Hinduism?
Well, that's a good question.
It's almost like those are the questions you would ask if you were actually interested in determining truth. I don't know.
This seems like a chapter he's really eager to get through. Get past, get done with it, throw some mud against the wall, hope some of it sticks. So far, nothing's sticking. I think another thought slide for me. I think any causation between modern Mormon familial conduct and a practice ceased over 100 years ago is tenuous at best and wholly undemonstrated by Austin. And likely it's indemonstrable.
Right.
Oh, this was a thought that came to me when we were texting about this the other night. I feel good about slavery because it allows me to live a better life. Isn't that his argument?
Yep. That is the effect of his argument.
I feel good about polygamy because it helps me be more faithful today.
Which again is an argument from consequences. And it's an argument from consequences purely about how it makes Austin feel.
Yes. Oh, and I love this one. We're continuing with the letter. I'll go ahead and I'll read this, but I love the line, the mob would have murdered Joseph anyway. Even if he hadn't been practicing polygamy, that mob would have come around and murdered him at some point because this was like personal. It wasn't anything Joseph Smith was doing that roused the ire of the mob. They just didn't like the cut of his jib. He writes, polygamy was practiced for about 2 generations in the early church, though the mob would have found a way to murder Joseph Smith eventually. This is about as well documented a statement as any other statement he has in this entire chapter. Though the mob would have found a way to murder Joseph Smith eventually, polygamy likely accelerated his demise. Polygamy in Nauvoo was kept confidential as it was illegal in Illinois, and Emma Smith, on and off, approved and disapproved of the practice. By the way, if I can stop there, I don't think that's a fair way to characterize Emma Smith's attitude toward polygamy. He gives a footnote 19 there at the end of that sentence. I looked it up. It goes to Brian Hales. That's how I knew it was in the footnotes. And Brian Hales has an episode called Emma Smith Struggles, in which he writes in the show notes the description of the episode. By mid-1843, remember, this is what Austin is citing to as support for his statement that Emma Smith on and off approved and disapproved of the practice of plural marriage. Here's what his source says. By mid-1843, Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy was becoming one of Nauvoo's worst kept secrets. One wonders how Emma Smith, his legal wife, could not have known what the rest of the community was whispering. And that's a rhetorical question, which indicates, yeah, of course she knew. We do know that by May 1843, she was definitely aware and temporarily supportive of their new marital dynamic. This support didn't last long, and their marriage was in crisis. And that is what Austin is using to say, off and on, she approved of plural marriage. Mm-hmm. You see why I think that's not exactly characterizing his source correctly.
Yeah. I asked this question of John DeLynn recently, and I'd be interested to know what you think about it. When Joseph is martyred and then Emma gets remarried to Bittaman, mm-hmm. she gets married on Joseph Smith's birthday. Mm-hmm. I'm trying not to ascribe too much to that, but I'm just thinking, if my wife died and you have all of the days of the year to select from, getting married on your past spouse birthday seems like a very conscious choice that's being made for a reason. What do you make of that, and what it says about how Emma may have felt towards Joseph after his martyrdom?
It could just be coincidence. I don't know. But obviously she knew what his birthday was, and it's an easy matter, you would think, to change the date of marriage. So I'm not sure, really. I can't tell you. I think of John Adams and, was it Thomas Jefferson, who both died on the 4th of July?
I know Jefferson did. I don't know about Adams.
There were 2 founding fathers who died on the same date that they had signed the Declaration of Independence, which I expect is a coincidence. So these things do happen. Of course, you have less choice about your death day than you do about your marriage day.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is of all the days, it just seems odd that Emma would, if she didn't have any hard feelings towards Joseph, it just seems odd that she would get remarried on Joseph Smith's birthday. But maybe I'm making too much of that.
I don't know. She could have waited until June 27th. If she really wanted to make a splash and wear a red dress.
That would really send a message.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question though. It's one of those things that you wonder about, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I'm more inclined to think it did than not. But it's hard for me to be sure what to make of that other than that.
Can I read this next sentence?
Would you please?
Some men in Nauvoo, like the evil John Bennett, okay, I added the evil, took advantage of women, telling them that he had been sanctioned by God through the prophet to have sexual relations. Now,
Isn't that what Joseph Smith did?
Okay.
I thought that was what Joseph Smith did too.
You just stole my joke. I was going to read.
I'm so sorry. Damn it.
I'm going to read the sentence again.
Okay.
Some men in Nauvoo, like Joseph Smith, took advantage of women, telling them that he had been sanctioned by God to have sexual relations. You can literally just change those few modifiers, change the one level of separation, and everything that John Bennett did, Joseph Smith did too. Yeah. The difference is just Mormons think that Joseph Smith was authorized to do it.
Right. Exactly. See, Joseph Smith was really told by God to do this. John Bennett, he was just kidding around. He was pretending.
And I know it's been a while.
Oh, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, I know it's been a while since we've talked about that, or about this, but that espouses divine command theory morality, which means that it was wrong for John Bennett to do it, but it was right for Joseph Smith to do the exact same thing purely because God authorized it. And for what it's worth, I just reject divine command theory morality, in part because it's the exact same defense that was used after World War II by the Nazis at the Nuremberg trial, saying I was just following orders. I don't believe in a celestial Nuremberg defense, and I don't think you do either.
Right. I just did what I was being told. Polygamous families in Utah experienced untold hardship, especially the women. Polygamy contributed to the hostilities between the settlers of Utah and the U.S. government. For these I thought that was really the main thing. For these reasons and more, it is easy for critics to declare that nothing good came of polygamy. Did you ever say that nothing good ever came of polygamy?
No.
I don't think I did either. Jeez, who are these critics he's talking about? Wait, is this another straw man? Referring to the times when polygamy is acceptable, Jacob 2:30, that's in the Book of Mormon, Kolby, declares, "For if I will, saith the Lord of hosts, raise up seed unto me, I will command my people. Otherwise they shall hearken unto these things." So Austin seems to be putting in this quote from the Book of Mormon to justify polygamy because God said it was okay if he needs to have more Mormons around.
Yeah, this is exactly the divine command theory morality I'm talking about. Austin's fine with it because God commanded it. So he's fine with the heartbreak we read from Helen Mar Kimball. He's fine with the heartbreak we heard it caused her mother, Violet Kimball, because God said so. So it's okay.
Yeah, very good. I don't think he asked himself why it is that the Nephites are even wondering about polygamy or practicing it when there's nobody else around to practice it with.
Yeah, that does remind me. This is some analysis I've been looking at for, I don't know, future stuff. But one thing that is interesting to me about the Book of Mormon's take on polygamy is if we look at the lens of what a typical Methodist would have understood or believed about polygamy in Joseph Smith's day, this is one area where the Book of Mormon, basically creating this loophole to allow for polygamy, does not line up with what the typical Methodists would have thought in Joseph Smith's day. They would have thought of polygamy as completely not allowable. And I don't know exactly what to think about that yet. I'm still doing some research on it, but I just wanted to note that it's kind of interesting to note that one of the few theological areas where the Book of Mormon differs from the Christianity that we know Joseph Smith was swimming in is this question of polygamy.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, when I talk about where are the women at to marry, this is written by Jacob, who was the brother of Nephi, who is the generation that comes over to the New World.
Right.
So I know that Jacob's older when he's writing this, but this is also after they separated from the Lamanites.
Right.
So whatever small group of people they had with him, had not had that much time to grow, and then it was cut in half. So where are all these women that they're marrying?
That's a great question. It's just like when Mormon and Moroni are having an exchange about infant baptism when they're the last two people left alive. Why in the world would the question have come up?
Good point. Good point. Well, they knew that that would be a real big hot button issue in Joseph Smith's day. That's why. It was written for our day. So why did Emma Smith disapprove of the practice of plural marriage with brief but short-lived periods of approval if it was only about dynastic sealings? That's my question. He said it's about dynastic sealings. It's not about sex.
Right.
But Emma Smith was on and off supportive. We read she was much more off than on. And my question is, if it's all about dynastic sealings and all these other things, why did Emma Smith disapprove of the practice so much?
Right. Right. No, yes, exactly. The resistance makes no sense. The heartbreak makes no sense. If it was all just about these dynastic sealings and about this grand idea of we're trying to seal the human family together, that is not reconcilable with what these women said. It isn't. Pure and simple.
And we're back to the letter. Would you like to read this first big paragraph at least?
I'd love to. Much can be said of the qualifier provided in Jacob 2:30. Raise up seed unto me. Does that mean more children, or does it mean more children in faithful believing homes? In early Utah, a case could be made for either or both. Huh. Okay. You would probably just say for both, I would think. But
what he's going to try and say is, I think is that the science tells us that actually polygamy produces fewer children per woman.
Right.
Than monogamy.
Right. While polygamy does not increase the number of children per woman, it does increase the number of total children in society as more otherwise unmarried women are married. Also, in early Utah, the number of endowed women exceeded men by nearly 20%. Undoubtedly, polygamy generated more children within the sealing covenant. Continue.
I think this is kind of silly because what he's basically arguing is what the church argued, is that the leaders are the ones who can take you to heaven. So get married to us, and we're the ones who will accumulate the most wives. But then they're taking women away from the populace and other people who could marry them. So I don't see why it is that you couldn't have a situation where everybody's monogamous and have more children being raised in a Mormon-centered home in a righteous family.
The other thing that's absurd about him making this argument after the rest of the chapter we've read is, if polygamy is about raising up seed unto me, why is he then defending Joseph Smith by saying Joseph Smith had no children with his plural wives?
Yes, that's a trap he fell into. It's not a trap of our creation. It's a trap of their own creation.
Yep.
Say that again.
Yeah.
I think it's that important.
It's an internal contradiction. The exception in Jacob 2 is polygamy is allowable when God wants to raise up seed unto me. Yet these apologists trip over themselves, making the case that Joseph Smith's polygamy was fine because he didn't have any children with any of these women and girls. But the point is, if God allows polygamy to raise up seed, why would that be the case? If the exception is to raise up seed, they actually should be making the exact opposite argument, that Joseph Smith wanted to have all of these children because that's the way the Book of Mormon authorizes polygamy, and they should be pointing to evidence of these children if they existed, of course. But that's the inherent internal contradiction in what they're arguing. The exception is authorized, but Joseph Smith wasn't using polygamy to further that exception's terms. He wasn't raising up seed.
Right. I'm going to read this middle line, 2 lines, and get your take on it, because I'm not sure what difference they make or why they're here. He writes, all plural marriages in early Utah required church leader approval. Some men entered plural marriage because they were asked to do so by church leaders.
I see what he's trying to do here.
What is that?
He's trying to say, he's going back to that original straw man inherently here, or implicitly here, where he's saying this wasn't all about sex. He's trying to say these men that entered into the plural marriages, some of these men at least, were doing so only because they were asked to do so by church leaders. That's implicit in what he's saying. And I agree with him. That's kind of the funny thing. Like, yeah, when the system was broken, people participated in the broken system, Austin. We don't have to believe that all these people have bad intention to have bad effects. The bottom line is polygamy had bad effects regardless of the intention of everyone involved along the chain.
It was here when I was reading through it that I thought of the Nuremberg defense.
Because
some
of the
men
church
entered
leader
plural
approval.
marriage because they were asked to do so by church leaders, as if that makes it okay.
Because in his worldview, it does, though. That's what I'm saying. He believes in the celestial Nuremberg defense. If God tells you to do it, it doesn't matter if it's like Nephi and it's to murder somebody, or if it's like Joseph Smith and it's to marry and have relations with a 14-year-old girl. That's fine because God told you to do it. No, I just don't believe that. That doesn't align with the version of God I ever believed in, that you can just be authorized to do things that are otherwise wrong. And this is from the crowd that poo-poos folks like you and us that no longer believe in God and say we're the ones that don't have morals. Are you joking?
Right. Well, if you're asked to do it by a church leader, you do it. It doesn't make any difference what it is. Participating, he writes, in plural marriage would have required a high level of devotion to the gospel and faith in Jesus Christ. I don't know why it's faith in Jesus Christ. You're doing what you're told to by the leaders of the church. Religion would not have been a casual, once a week sort of thing. It would have been an every moment, everyday lifestyle. It would have been an intense, Abrahamic-like sacrifice. So this is a good thing. And this is where he's trying to build up how this sacrifice, this Abrahamic-like sacrifice of plural marriage, it's not Abraham at all. Okay. It's a hard thing. It's an atrocious thing. God asks Abraham to kill his son in the Old Testament. It's atrocious. It's so ridiculously hard. That's why I think Abraham gets transferred over to plural marriage. Also, he had more than one wife, or at least he had a concubine in Hagar. But they're trying to say this is an Abrahamic sacrifice that's as bad as God asking you to kill your kid. And somehow this is a good thing that God does this because it makes the community stronger. And apparently that strength lasts for over a century, even after they stop practicing the plural marriage. Any comments from you before I switch slides?
No, great point.
Okay. Oh my gosh. This is the best quote in the whole book, though. In this crappy chapter, he has the best quote in the whole book because he quotes from no less an authority than Jonah Barnes.
Author Jonah Barnes. They don't let just anybody self-publish a book, RFM. Can I read this, please?
No, he's an author, and he's stolen some pretty good books.
That's right. In an email interaction, plagiarist author Jonah Barnes told me the following: loyalty to the practice of plural marriage led to huge sacrifices economically, socially, physically, and emotionally. Some members lost everything they had for the cause of plural marriage. In this way, the Lord forced a deep-rooted shift in the hearts of his people so that nothing would ever again approach the sacredness reserved for family. I want to think about that for a second. In this way, the Lord forced a deep-rooted shift in the hearts of his people so that nothing would ever again approach the sacredness reserved for family. So by messing with their family relationships, God taught them the importance of family. Am I correctly understanding Jonah's point there?
Yes, and this is the way. I mean, what he's doing, what he's trying to do is he's making the argument. This is where Austin got the argument, was from Jonah Barnes. At least he attributed Jonah Barnes as the source of this crappy argument. That's more than Jonah would do.
What do you call secondhand plagiarism? Hearsay plagiarism? I'm just curious.
But he's trying to say how important it was and how it just structured the whole DNA of the Mormons so that they're better family members today. A deep-rooted shift in the hearts of his people so that nothing would ever again approach the sacredness reserved for family. Nothing says a family is sacred like plural marriage.
Just as Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac to prove his loyalty, the Latter-day Saints were commanded to sacrifice everything to steal their devotion to their spouses and family. That's such a crazy argument to make. Nothing stealed my devotion to my spouse and family like being married to other women.
or just stepping out from time to time.
Yeah.
I find that helps increase my devotion.
Now,
my wife.
here's the one sentence I do agree with Jonah on. Polygamy steal the foundations of our theology. Yep, I agree with you, Jonah. I just think that that's a bad thing, and you think it's a good thing.
Notice how Jonah worked the word steal into his comment. I think that's a Freudian slip on his part. It's a cry for help. Someone help Jonah. He's stealing things all over the place. He's even admitting it tacitly. So that is his quote from Jonah Barnes. And this is really the foundation of his entire argument.
Right.
Is Jonah Barnes, this thing that he pulled out of his ass. This is what it looks like when a person is trying to come up with excuses for why it is that polygamy actually wasn't such a bad thing after all. It was actually a great thing. Oh, the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. Can you tell us about this, Kolby?
Yeah, so post hoc ergo propter hoc literally just means because this happened, like the Latin is like after this, because this. And so it's the fallacy that assumes a causal relationship between two events or states based on chronological succession alone. So the example I've used before to kind of like explain it, going back to like a syllogism, like you talked about with premise, conclusion, right? I go outside and my sidewalk in front of my house is wet. Every morning I go out and the sidewalk is wet. The question is it because of rain, sprinklers? There are a lot of, the key here is to understand there are a lot of reasons the sidewalk can be wet. I can't automatically assume that the sidewalk is wet because it rained, because I have sprinklers. That's where people commit this post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy all of the time, by assuming because one thing followed another that there's a causal relationship between the two.
Yes, thank you. And so the example given here, sporting superstition, a tennis player won 2 games in a row and also happened to eat chicken the night before each game. From then on, he decides to always eat chicken before his games because it seems to cause him to win.
Right.
So it's a lot of superstition, a lot of times where this post hoc ergo propter hoc, it says propter hoc. I always said prompter. Am I saying it wrong?
It's propter, and I was going to take great glee in correcting you once live on the air.
Dang it, and I corrected myself. Oh, well, post hoc ergo propter hoc. The way I heard it is because the rooster crows, the sun rises.
Right. Instead
So
of
without the rooster crowing, the sun would not rise, right?
Right. Instead of the exact inverse, which is what it is.
Right. And what we're saying here is that this is a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. It confuses correlation with causation. So what they're saying is, yeah, God put the early Mormon women through hell in this freaking diabolical machine called plural marriage. And because of that, that's the critical part, right? Because of that, Mormons score higher on family devotedness today.
Which also they never established, but
that's true too. That's the begging the question part. I like this one. Did you see this one?
Yeah.
A professor at a chalkboard saying every single person who confuses correlation and causation ends up dying. Why is that funny?
Because everyone ends up dying. So it's confusing correlation and causation in the example.
Yes. That's a pretty good one, huh?
Thanks for making me explain the joke.
You're welcome. Well, these are jokes that are made about things, but I really do want the audience to understand. Because sometimes, I look at the live chat and people are having trouble keeping up. So not everybody, but sometimes people do wonder. Number 5 of Austin's rules. I'm sorry, what was it, Kolby?
Oh, I was just going to say, you want me to read this example?
Yeah, would you? Number 5 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks?
Yeah, so like we've just been talking about, even though he doesn't use the right term, questionable cause is what Austin calls it, correlation versus causation. And he says, oversimplification presumes there is a single cause of a more complex phenomenon. It is often used to insinuate that a correlated variable is the cause of an outcome.
And then he goes ahead and breaks that rule. I swear to you, the same person who wrote these rules in this book did not write the rest of the book.
Look at this on the right-hand column. When the manipulator, Austin, when the manipulator lacks evidence, his or her, I'm just going to say his only corroboration is questionable correlations. Agree.
Well, Austin, so you're a manipulator, and so is Jonah. Oh, number 6. We've got another one. Number 6 of Austin's rules that he himself breaks. Appealing to Jonah Barnes as an authority on anything. That's actually in there in the Logical Fallacies book. Appealing to Jonah Barnes as an authority on anything. Can you read this one as well?
I can. Appeal to authority is the claim that something must be true or false because it is believed or not by someone who is said to be an authority on the subject.
Right. And I guess all he said about Jonah Barnes is that he's an author, so that's good enough. He's an authority. I want to read this one on the right, too.
Yeah.
We are naturally inclined to believe an expert. Faith crisis victims do not have the time to be expert archaeologists, historians, chemists, linguists, lawyers, doctors, and authors. Authors is in there. It is easier to trust an expert. Critics rely on our belief in experts to make bad arguments. Isn't that what Austin's doing here? Is relying on an expert in order to make a bad argument?
I mean, I would not say he's relying on an expert, but that's what he thinks he's doing. Yes.
Yes. Good point. The authority may be unreliable. In this case, is in spades. Note that actual authorities rarely speak in black and white terms, which is what it seems that not Austin, but Jonah speaks exclusively in black and white terms.
This whole thing of his write-up of appeal to authority fallacy demonstrates he doesn't understand it at all. The appeal to authority fallacy is actually when you say something must be, so it must be an absolute case. It must be true or it must be false because experts in the field believe it to be so. So it'd be like saying, if you and I are talking about some legal doctrine, because RFM and Kolby are attorneys, they must be right. However, when we're talking statistics, there are good reasons that we believe experts because
Right.
not all of us can be self-published, self-claimed experts like Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we do rely on expert archaeologists, historians, chemists, linguists, lawyers, doctors, and I would say legitimate non-self-published authors.
All right. I think we're on the home stretch now of this chapter. And here we have another excerpt from his letter, which I headed, Eternal Marriage and Plural Marriage used to be the same thing, Austin.
Mm-hmm.
This is where he writes, around 20% of living church members descend from those who practice polygamy, including much of our highest leadership. That's because there's so much nepotism there. Now, remember, he's got to try and establish that the polygamy is the cause of the good marriages, the good families Mormons have today. But here he's saying only around 20% of living church members today have polygamous ancestry. So it's either limited to that 20%, or this polygamous ancestry is just really helping all the Mormons, regardless of whether they're descended from them. He asks a couple of questions. Is it possible to talk about all the wonderful fruits of the church without talking about plural marriage? Yeah, I would think that would be possible. Do you think that'd be possible, Kolby?
Yeah, I mean, if only 20% of the church participated in polygamy or descend from those who participated in polygamy, it would seem like just as a operation of the way that numbers work, that most of the fruits of the church are not attributable to plural marriage. That's what I would expect.
Yeah. And I don't think plural marriage is a wonderful fruit of the church. But he says there's so many wonderful fruits of the church that we can connect right back to this plural marriage. We can't talk about them today without including plural marriage. He says, if I omit Doctrine and Covenants 132, don't I omit the beautiful doctrine of eternal marriage and the sealing power? And that's why I said eternal marriage and plural marriage used to be the same thing, Austin. Hate to break it to you. DNC 132 is plural marriage from beginning to end. You can't take the eternal marriage out of plural marriage, at least not in a historically responsible way.
Right.
He then asks, would the church as we know it today have survived without those early saints' sacrifices?
That's such a ridiculous question. Like, that's looking back at something that happened in history, one variable in history that you can't change because you can't go back and change it, but it's assuming that history was going to end up the same way. It's like not recognizing the way that time works. So I'm glad we could teach Austin about both time and numbers on this slide.
It's almost tautological because everything is what it is today because of what it was before.
Exactly.
regardless of what that is. You could say, before Charlie Manson passed away, God rest his soul. You could say, well, Charlie Manson, would he be in prison today without the early murders that he directed?
Right. Yeah. And so the answer to the question, would the church as we know it today have survived without those early saint sacrifices? No. But does that mean the church could still exist today? Yeah, it probably would just look entirely different. It's like there are these interesting divergent paths of church history where it's like, what if this person had come to power instead of this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are
what if Joseph Smith hadn't been killed in Carthage?
Right. If Joseph Smith hadn't been killed in Carthage, I think the whole thing would have imploded.
I think so too. He died at just the right time, maybe a little bit late. Now, here's a quote from Brigham Young, which I found off the internet, but then I went to the actual Journal of Discourses that it's quoted from, because this is where he talks about polygamy a lot. This is one of his favorite or famous quotes about polygamy. He says, "You who wish," now on the left is the entire page. It's page 269 of volume 11 of Journal of Discourses. The right is just the paragraph from that same page. It's a little bit bigger, so I can read it. "You who wish that there were no such thing in existence, polygamy, if you have in your hearts to say, we will pass along in the church without obeying or submitting to it, our faith or believing this order, because for aught that we know, this community may be broken up yet, and we may have lucrative offices offered to us. We will not therefore be polygamists, lest we should fail in obtaining some earthly honor, character, and office, etc." So this is his message to people who are members of the church, but who are not practicing polygamy.
It's almost like he could see that maybe a potential senator wouldn't be sworn in because they practice polygamy.
Holy crap. They can see around corners. At least Brigham Young could. You're right. He says, "The man that has that in his heart and will continue to persist in pursuing that policy of not being a polygamist will come short of dwelling in the presence of the Father and the Son in celestial glory. The only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy. Others attain unto a glory and may even be permitted to come into the presence of the Father and the Son, but they cannot reign as kings in glory because they had blessings offered unto them and they refused to accept them." This is one of the several places where Brigham Young makes it very clear that if you're not practicing polygamy, you're not going to be exalted, at least not to the degree to which a polygamist will. And, I read through a little bit more of this same journal. You get to page 272, you come up with this interesting thing. Can you read this where it says marriage is a civil contract? Brigham Young, same sermon, few pages later.
Yes. Marriage is a civil contract. You might as well make a law to say how many children a man shall have, or as to make a law to say how many wives he shall have. It would be as sensible to make a law to say how many horses or oxen he shall possess, or how many cows his wife shall milk. Well, there we go again, seeing exactly what I've said a few times this episode. He's literally equating women to property like horses and oxen.
Yeah, I thought you would like that one. It's amazing what you can find if you read these Journal of Discourses. Now, I say Austin's entire argument boils down to another logical fallacy, the argument from consequences, which you've mentioned already. And he writes, this is the last paragraph of this chapter. You see, it goes to footnotes right after that. "Polygamy was an uncomfortable topic for me for many years." Wow, imagine how uncomfortable it was for the women who actually had to live at Austin. "I am grateful," he writes, "I am grateful that I do not live in those times when it was practiced," which means that you couldn't be exalted if you wouldn't take another wife in Brigham Young's day. He says, "It is likewise uncomfortable for me to ignore the good fruits of polygamy." Why is that uncomfortable for you, Austin? You've made this whole argument up with a little help from Jonah Barnes, that the good fruits of polygamy are the stronger families in the Mormon church today, which you still haven't demonstrated. Okay. And it's a total non sequitur. You have begged the question out the yin yang. And on top of that, you're making an argument from consequences, an appeal to consequences, which is yet another logical fallacy. He says, it is likewise uncomfortable for me to ignore the good fruits of polygamy, as critics are apt to do. It is uncomfortable for me. Wow, he really does say that all those times. It is uncomfortable for me to ignore the sacrifices that some of my ancestors made to fortify the footing of the church. It is uncomfortable for me to ignore or mock our legacy of polygamy while enjoying all of its fruits. So slavery is good if it helps us live a better life.
Yeah, that's his argument. The other thing that is so interesting to me about the second to last sentence is uncomfortable for me to ignore the sacrifices that my ancestors made. Earlier, I made a comment about how Mormonism over focuses on intention, good intention. Another thing that it does is it is hyper fixated on telling you to be a good descendant, to honor the sacrifices that your ancestors made. This is, again, where I've had this perspective shift through my faith crisis, where I care so much more about being a good ancestor and setting my kids and grandkids up for success and telling them what I think about a system like this than I ever would to honor. Like, it doesn't take away anything from my ancestors' sacrifice or their participation in the church to just simply say this is the non-straw man critical position, Austin. My ancestors did the best they could with the information they had available to them. And I would expect that they would understand that I am just doing the same thing in my exit from the church and not believing in the things that they did believe. So they were doing the best they could with the information and tools that they had available to them. I'm doing the same thing. And I like giving that to my children instead of telling them that because I associated with an institution that they should be expected, and all of their children henceforth and forever are expected to associate with that same institution.
Yeah, the church uses the example of the pioneers to whip their members into obedience. If they could do it, so can you.
Right.
This is his concluding paragraph. This is where he's supposed to hit the notes strongest, but all he talks about is how he's uncomfortable, and he says that same thing 4 times.
It's also funny to that point that he says it's uncomfortable for me to ignore or mock. Just take the mock out for a second. It's uncomfortable for me to ignore our legacy of polygamy. He didn't share anything about the actual legacy of polygamy. When we looked at those lines from Helen Mar Kimball, he doesn't want to think about the actual reality of polygamy. He wants to go with the whitewashed, sanitized narrative of what polygamy was and all the good that it's done. So, ironically, he's doing exactly the thing that he said makes him uncomfortable. He does ignore the legacy of polygamy.
Wow. Well done. I like it. I made another comment below, which I think I'm just repeating myself at this point. Austin's entire argument rests upon a premise he has yet to demonstrate. His chapter's over. He hasn't demonstrated the premise that his entire argument is based on, i.e., that any good things in Mormon families today are the result of plural marriage. Now, a few more slides to take us out of here. The appeal to consequences. This is a guy saying, that's absurd. If my God didn't exist, my life would be meaningless. Therefore, God has to exist. It's also quite circular, but it's also an appeal to consequences. A lot of these logical fallacies, they will overlap. But how many times have you heard somebody say, if it weren't for God, my life would be meaningless? What they're really saying is, I want my life to have meaning. Therefore, God must exist.
Yes.
It's an appeal to consequences. Or it's meaningful, therefore God must exist. Yes.
Right.
And begging the question, again, begging the question is a technical term. This is good to repeat. I don't know how long I had heard the expression begging the question before I found out what it really meant.
Right.
It's a technical term used in logic and debate. It does not mean raises or poses a question that needs to be answered. What it does mean is it makes an assumption and doesn't ask if the assumption is correct. So it avoids asking the important question, which is whether your initial assumption is even right. So begging the question would be like quoting from a book of scripture or anything that you claim to be authoritative on a subject in order to establish the proof of something without first establishing the authority or inerrancy of the book that you're quoting.
Yeah, the very succinct, perfect example of this is there's a Australian comedian, atheist guy. His name's Tim Minchin. He wrote the music for the Matilda musical. He's
I
done
actually think that I've seen this guy, kind of
Yeah.
crazy looking and long
Oh, yeah.
hair.
Long ginger hair.
Yes.
He's hilarious, but he has a song called The Good Book that perfectly succinctly explains this. The line is, I know the good book's good because the good book says it's good. That's
I
what
think
it
I know
is.
him because you introduced me to him. I think that's
Mhm.
where I found out about him, actually.
Yeah.
Yep, that's why. And the prophet will never lead the church astray because the prophet said that the prophet will never lead the church astray. Here's another example of begging the question. Oh, this is like it. Here's a guy holding up what is probably the Bible. It's called The Truth. It could be the Book of Mormon or any other authoritative religious text. He says, my book tells the truth. It says so here. Oh, and number 7, this was the last one that I put up here. Of Austin's own arguments that he himself breaks, there's begging the question. He actually included it. Reaching a conclusion based on a premise that lacks support. Do you want to read the part on the far right of this same one?
I do. I was also focused on the middle because his example isn't even begging the question. His example he gave was the church hid the fact that Joseph Smith used the seer stone in the translation process. Thus, the church is immoral.
It's a non sequitur.
It has nothing to do. Just reading that first chapter, it's funny. I'm going to go through that one more time because
wait a second. It's not even a non sequitur. I mean, there is a sequence to this.
It's
the church hid the fact that Joseph Smith used the seer stone in the translation process. That's true. They did do that. Thus, the church is immoral. Well, that gets a bit subjective when you're talking about morality.
Right.
You're certainly deceptive.
Right. Reading his actual example.
But I've got to say this, though. You're right. This is important. When you read that, I get the sense that Austin doesn't understand what these logical fallacies are. He got them from somewhere. And then he had to come, or somebody had to come up with an example. And he came up with an example that is not at all the fallacy that he's trying to portray.
Right. The funny thing is, it's in there. The unstated premise, the begged question, is the fact that the church hid the seer stone. The person would have to establish that the church did hid the seer stone, which by the fact, or as a consequence, they did. They absolutely did. That could be established. But in his example, that's the premise that isn't established. So it was right there.
Oh my gosh! So he is. He is using it correctly.
No. He's not using it correctly, but he could have with that example, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm just further bolstering what you said, which is, yes, if you actually read Austin's examples and his description of these fallacies, it is very, very clear he does not understand them at all. This is his kind of recapitulation why this is a manipulation tactic and fallacy. He says it subtly takes a giant leap in logic to influence the victim. The victim will likely agree with the conclusion if the false premise is assumed. Even if the target does not agree with the conclusion, the believed false premise itself can generate doubt. So we are targets and victims of Austin's sloppy thinking, right?
So he's trying to say that the church did not hide the fact that Joseph Smith used the seer stone in the translation process?
I don't know if that's what he's trying to say, or if he's trying to say that it's begging the question to say that then the church is immoral because it did that. Again, it's this. There have been a few times we've hit this point with Austin's work where I've used this phrase, it's fractally wrong. Like, it's so wrong, I don't even know where to start to explain to the person why it's wrong and how it's wrong. Like, it's that wrong that it's almost like if I was grading this as a law student's work, I would literally just have to say, you need to throw this out and start over.
Fractally wrong. That's the issue with the whole chapter. That's why I've been having so much difficulty trying to wrap my head around it and present it, because it's fractally wrong. And fortunately, we are done. That's good news for everybody, especially for Austin and Tikla, who I'm sure are watching. Hi, guys. So, Austin, there's two. Oh, no, you're Kolby. So, Kolby, there's 2 more chapters left.
There's 2 more. You want me to give a preview? We've got one left on prophets and ongoing restoration, which I'm very much looking forward to because I want to talk about the Lowry Nelson letters and what that means for the process of revelation in the church.
Okay.
I don't think Austin does, but I'm going to. And the last episode we'll do, we're kind of rolling his conclusion, which is very short, into his penultimate chapter, which has to do with basically like general theism concepts, general belief in God versus atheism. So we'll talk about some of that, maybe some brief origin of life stuff, and then we will be done with this very compelling series on a not so compelling book.
I'm very excited about that. I know we've been at this for over a year. And I just think it's amazing that we're coming to a conclusion on this. I'm excited, and I know Austin is too. I hope everybody else out there is excited. You know, this is, let me remind you, this was the big thing in Mormon apologetics last year. I don't know if it is still this year, but he published it last year in August of 2024. He made some corrections in it in January of this year, 2025. And I haven't seen any corrections since this. So apparently this is how he wants it to stand. He's completely satisfied with this version of his letter.
He's got more books to write.
Oh, yeah. I hope they're at least as good. So, Kolby, closing statement.
I think my closing statement, I'll just come back to the statement I shared with reading the words of Helen Mar Kimball and just pointing out that if you really have any doubt whether the fruits of Mormon polygamy relate back to sexism and abuse and a disgusting, abhorrent system, I would say, and I'm not trying to castigate Austin here, he's a product of his environment, but I can think of nothing that is clear evidence of the sexism inherent in that system than the fact that Austin thought it was an acceptable argument to say that Helen Mar's 14-year-old marriage to Joseph Smith is okay because her dad said so. I think the fact that he emphasized that and selectively quoted from her autobiography, emphasizing or bringing to his chapter only what her father said, is the clearest example of the problem, the many, many problems I have with polygamy, and makes a far better case for how sexist the system is than I really ever could.
It is hard to get away from the implication in that story that Heber C. Kimball is buying plural wives with his daughter. You got to, what do you call it? Pay to play. Got to give up your daughter in order to get other men's daughters.
Mm-hmm. And even if, let's just say, even if Heber C. was sincere in believing what Joseph Smith was selling, which I think he probably was, if you want my honest opinion, that doesn't make it okay.
Oh, right. Absolutely not. Any more than if anybody, I've already said Charlie Manson. If he's sincere, how does that help? Does that make things better? I don't think it does. I think it makes things worse.
Right.
And lest it be forgot, Heber C. Kimball, Helen's father, whose word she took, and without whose encouragement and assurance she would not have entered into this marriage at the age of 14 with Joseph Smith. He's the one who, after they got in Utah, reprimanded the missionaries returning from, I think it was Europe mostly, and England, for marrying all the young, pretty women themselves, and told them they need to not do that and save some of them for the leadership like Heber C. Yeah. Okay. So everybody, thanks so much for watching. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. If I haven't made a pitch for donations yet, which I don't think I have, consider it made. If you haven't donated yet, please go to radiofreemormon.org, click the donate button, make a donation today. You'll be glad you did. And thank you. A special heartfelt thank you to all of you who watch the show, and especially to those of you who have gone the extra mile and made that donation. Thank you so much. Your donations do keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. Well, that's about all for tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining me, Kolby, on this show. I look forward to the next couple of shows where we tie this one off. Everybody have a great day. This is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.